It's that one. Sorry about this. Well, good afternoon and welcome to the PSB overall and scrutiny overall. Get there committee this afternoon. May I welcome everybody, and just to confirm, as a council, we welcome the use of the Welsh language, but we have not received any requests to do that in Welsh. Could I also remind you this meeting is being webcast, therefore please could you turn off your mobile phones, and as I'm the most guilty person around here normally on that score, I turn the volume off. There's a £5 your favourite charity if we don't. I'll pay that over there. Thank you very much. And could you, all members, sign the attendance register and confirm any apologies received? Have we had any apologies? I think we took results on that. Declarations of interest. I don't think we've got any, have we? Not on this meeting. Right. Item number 3, minutes for the previous meeting. I think anything is Jess and I that can go through these, as we did the previous bit on that one. So, if you'd like to have a look at minutes of the previous meeting, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9, and page 9. You okay with that, Jess? Thank you. And item number, notes here, agenda item 4, which is action sheets. Have we got anything on those actions?
No, Chair, I have nothing to add, other than if members have any questions, I can feed those back for you.
Anybody? No, good. Right. So down to what we're all here for, which is the Torfaen Public Services Board annual report. And I believe that the before we do anything, if you could all introduce yourselves from the PSB board. Start with Steve, if you'd like to. I know who Steve is, but just introduce who you are. Sorry about that.
I'm Steve Brooks, and I represent.
Use your mics. Use your mics, because we're not going to get you on camera otherwise.
I'm Paula Kennedy. I'm from Mellin Homes.
I'm Sue Brown, Partnerships and PSB Coordinator.
I'm Leader here as Chair of the PSB.
No, just repeat briefly.
Jeff Cuthbert, Police and Crime Commissioner for Gwent, and I need to point out that, of course, policing and my office are statutory invitees to the board, not full members, because we're a reserved public service.
Bill Purvis, Natural Resources Wales.
Simon Brown, South Wales Fire and Rescue Service.
Thank you there. And now over to Anthony Hunt, who I believe wants to say something before we get on with this.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to introduce the discussion that you're going to have really ahead of questions. First of all, I'd like to thank PSB colleagues for coming along this afternoon. I think it's evidence of the teamwork approach that we take. I'd also like to thank scrutiny members for your continued engagement on this. I think your contribution, thoughts, questions are appreciated because they can make the PSB as a whole stronger. The wellbeing plan has been scrutinised on 3 separate occasions, leading to the final report being approved by Council and the wider statutory partners of the PSB. It's important to note this is a partnership plan and not just a Council plan. There's the statutory requirement to produce an annual report that's being presented to scrutiny for comment and to receive views on current progress and future delivery of the wellbeing plan. Each of the wellbeing objectives has an executive and operational lead, and we're also working on a defined piece of work with Academy Wales and a graduate to support how the PSB can work better together in delivering those partnership objectives. In terms of delivery, the work of the plan as by its title, Future Generations, has to be a long-term plan. We're encouraged by both the Welsh Government and the Commissioner to think about long-term issues and to plan effectively. Therefore, at this early stage, the planning partners are concentrating on exploration, understanding what the causes are behind the issues, best practice, changing behaviours, building trust. Having said that, there has been progress on some more immediate pieces of work as well. In preparing the report this year, we wanted to make it more interactive and understandable. We developed some short films around the objectives to better inform, to reduce the volume of print in the report and to make it more engaging to read, and hopefully also use simple, sort of plain language. We've also included a page-at-a-glance approach on the PSB website, so we're looking at new ways to get the messages out, and this opportunity to film is a new method for us, and I'll be interested in your thoughts on that, amongst other things. The annual report does not require individual sign-off. The report was signed off by the PSB in May 2019, and due to timescales is being translated for statutory publication in July. The report is then sent to our Welsh Government, the Commissioner's Office and the Wales Audit Office. Your views from this scrutiny will feed into the ongoing work across the PSB, and your consideration to report it to the PSB at our next meeting. The annual report not only looks at what's happening locally, but also what partnership offers have been undertaking regionally through the Gwent Strategic Wellbeing Group. There are 6 key objectives partnership staff are working on, and progress on this work is being reported to the G10 group of Chief Executives. The purpose of that is to join up and reduce duplication at a regional level whilst maintaining the strategic links within the Region Partnership Board. The report contains segments on regional collaboration and making the links to local objectives, on future scenario work and what could the future hold to us and what could be the challenges, a section on the board activity and development, on the Officer Support Group and the PSB objectives, on scrutiny, on challenges facing the PSB, and on funding we have drawn down as a PSB. I think, Chair, there's the suggestion of a film, if you want to see that in a second, but after that I'll be more than happy to take questions alongside colleagues.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Could we, I think having the film would be a splendid way of opening our scrutiny session. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Anthony Hunt. I'm the leader of Torvine Council and also the chair of the Local Public Services Board. As a Public Services Board, we're trying to work together as different public services organisations to help improve the lives of people in Torvine and our communities. That, for me, is the most important job, that we all work together to try and deliver those key objectives that we should share as public service organisations. And we'll only do that by working together in partnership, moving out of the old silos of public services and really working together to improve outcomes for local people. That's why I'm so positive about the work that the Local Public Service Board is doing, all working together in the spirit of true partnership to address the challenges that not just in the short term we face in Torvine, but the long term. How do we make Torvine better, a better place to live for future generations to come? I'm proud of Torvine, proud to live and work here and to raise my family here. The Public Service Board is doing great work, working to make Torvine a better place to live. Please watch these series of videos to see some of the work that we've been doing.
My name is Fen Turner and I work for Natural Resources Wales. Our climate is already changing and will continue to do so. This will affect our communities, the services we provide, our assets and our infrastructure. In Gwent, like many other areas in Wales, we're likely to experience hotter, drier summers, warmer, wetter winters and an increased frequency in extreme weather events. In 2018, during an extended period of hot weather, South East Wales experienced a number of wildfire events. The impact and damage to habitat and species was devastating, and the scars still linger on the landscape. These events also had a significant burden on our emergency services and on the public sector purse. We also know there are a number of health risks associated with a changing climate. which have the potential to have the greatest impact on the most vulnerable members of our society. For instance, by coping with extreme temperatures or flooding. It's clear from the early work that we've done in this area that if the climate is changing, then we have to too. It's also clear that taking early action is always better than taking a reactive approach. The Climate Ready Gwent Working Group, which is made up of public sector organisations working across the region, has convened to identify what we can do collectively to prepare for this different future. Complex risks will require integrated, collaborative interventions. Working in isolation just will not be enough. As such, we're looking to address the root cause of issues and to do so collectively with our partners, shifting the focus from risk to opportunity where we can. The groundbreaking Wellbeing of Future Generations Act and Environment Act Wales has given the public sector permission to think in this way and to act collectively on both a local and regional footprint. The Climate Ready Gwent Working Group have been working towards a collective regional vision which is directly informed by the lived experience of communities and landscapes which have been exposed to extreme weather in the past. Talking with our local communities about past events has helped us identify where we need to change our approach and to help support the shift towards a climate-ready future. Working in this way has helped us to identify several opportunities where working together and collaborating at the appropriate scale we can improve the resilience of our local natural and urban environments. The next phase of this work will focus on identifying where nature-based solutions could help improve local resilience and deliver a number of other natural benefits. We know that improving the management of our natural resources means that we will be better able to address challenges such as climate change. The Climate Ready Gwent Working Group have also started working together to identify what changes we can make to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, such as natural gas, coal and oil, by exploring the potential opportunities for greener transport solutions for the wider Gwent region. This has included looking at our own fleet vehicles to determine if there is potential for introducing ultra-low emission vehicles as part of a rolling programme for fleet replacements. Looking at local barriers to plug-in vehicle adoption, such as where there is no dedicated off-street parking, and looking at opportunities across the region for electric vehicle charging points. Our work has only just begun, but already by working together we've been able to pool our expertise and resources. But this collaborative approach isn't just about delivering our existing services better and more efficiently. It's also about how a more joined-up public sector can actually deliver different and better things by working strategically with our partners to help shape a more sustainable future for the people and places of Torfaen and the wider Gwent region.
Thank you very much. And I was reminded I hadn't introduced ourselves. So if we'd start with Janet.
I'm Councillor Janet Jones. Sorry.
Councillor Jess Powell. I'm Rebecca, the Scrutiny Officer.
I thought it was
Councillor Hugh Bevan, Lanark Avon Eastern Ponty Award.
Councillor Peter Jones.
I'm your chair for today, Councillor Stuart Ashley from Pontywydd. Right, I think without much ado we're going to the scrutiny, and it says, as it says, our report summary says that what suggested scrutiny activity, I'm sure you're well aware of it, it says the committee is invited to consider the extent to which the PSB has delivered the wellbeing plan during year one and, using their knowledge and expertise, provide comments and recommendations for PSB to consider in developing and delivering their work programme. So, without much ado, I'll ask the first sort of strand of questions, which is, I've got on here, how do you feel your partnership approach has suited you in year one? How do you, who would like to start answering that one?
I'll have a stab if you like.
Yeah.
Let's start. I think for us, both in Julian Williams, the Chief Constable, isn't represented directly here, but I think in terms of Gwent Police and my office, the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, we found it a very rewarding procedure. We, of course, attend all 5 PSBs across Gwent, and they're not exactly the same because local circumstances are different, but nevertheless, in terms of the principles involved, key public service partners, plus, of course, the third sector, to see them working together with a shared aim, even though it's early days yet in terms of the statutory public service boards, I think is very rewarding, and especially at times of austerity, for us to share resources, share knowledge, and agree collaborative action for the benefit of individuals and communities has been a very rewarding thing to see. And I think that even though it's still relatively early days, there is clear progress from this approach.
I guess one of my observations would be that housing organisations are not statutory members of the PSB, but we've been invited to be a part of it, and that to me sort of demonstrates the collaborative partnership approach that the Torfaen PSB wants to take. It doesn't have to have certain members sitting around the table, but it's chosen to do so because it recognises that working collaboratively beyond just those statutory invitees is likely to result in a better outcome. And certainly our experience has been very positive, and I think that the PSB has been looking at how it can collaborate more effectively. I think that's one of the drivers that we've been focusing on more recently, is saying, okay, how can we work better together?
I think Paula's point is a good one. We try not to be hierarchical. Some of the best contributions over the year have been made by people who aren't necessarily statutory partners, but we work together. I think at a board level, we're doing the work of building a culture that's different, of not just doing things the same. It's getting that balance right, isn't it, about building the foundations properly, whilst also people out there are interested in outcomes. But if you move straight to outcomes, you don't build the organisational culture properly, and you don't embed it properly within our organisations. I think that's maybe the work that we need to continue working on and developing, is if we all build a culture at our level of working together, that can't just be us, it has to be everyone within our organisations as well. And it's key to do that. So it's early days, but I think we're building the foundations that are needed.
Chair, just to say, just to add to that, yeah. An example, if you like, is I'm an environmental person by training, scientist, and I'm been allowed or lucky enough to be leading the objective on healthy ageing in Torfaen. So that helps me integrate. It helps me ask some silly questions that sometimes maybe not a silly question, but also it just reflects the need for the people, the membership of the board, I think, who are keen to think about just working differently, because that's what the Act requires us to do. And in my particular objective, there's some really good examples of working between the Health Board, local authority social services, as well as local communities in Blaenavon. So, yeah, I'm pleased with how it's going.
I just want to ask a question on this question. Sorry.
I'm quite new on this board, but I read the report and I thought it was there was great clarity and it was very informative. I also noticed that whilst there are some strengths, there are some weak points, and I just wonder, should we be setting ourselves some targets of achievability? But on the whole, I was very impressed with what I read.
Reflect on what Janet's just said.
I think as a board, we've Anthony said it right. When it's a long term, the Act is a huge culture change for the whole of Wales. It's a culture change Act. It requires everything to change. So we've tried to in Torfaen look at things we can do early, but also have an ambition that's so we can look longer term. So some of our objectives are for the shorter term, and I think we've tried to reflect that in the report where we've achieved those. We haven't achieved all of them, but I hope that the short-term objectives that we're doing are also helping us achieve the longer term ones as well. They're going in the same direction. So we'd welcome views if you feel there are other objectives that we might like to put in other measures, then let us know. But we try to tip the balance between longer term and short term.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, if you like, and then Jeff, come back.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm new to this committee as well, but that was something that struck me, where the opening paragraphs talk about long-term deliverables, 25 to 30 years. There are also aspects within the report that work is currently ongoing, such as the Uplands project, for example. That's one example. And I just felt perhaps that there could be, it would help us a bit more. I know some of the objectives can be a little bit vague, you know, in terms of what exactly is a globally resilient Wales, for example, but you guys will be better informed in Natural Resources Wales and exactly what that means. But, I mean, I wondered whether we could have a little bit more in terms of, I think the document is great in terms of the strategic high-level initiative document setting out the direction of travel, but if we could have more short, medium and longer-term goals, maybe it's a bit too early to perhaps have a kind of a SMART, you know, the acronym in terms of specific targets. Perhaps we may be too early for that, but ultimately, you know, move in that sort of direction of travel in terms of the specifics of goal that's being set and how we're going to measure that, and then how we're going to work towards attaining that. Thank you.
If I can just come in there. I think just to make clear to everyone that the plan itself, which was published last year, does have short, medium and longer term, whether they're goals or actions that we were working towards. And apologise if this report hasn't made that correlation back and picked those up. We've just tried to report on what was happening within the 12-month period, and really we published the plan in May, so we're probably talking less than 12 months that officers have been working on it. But if you go back to the plan that's on the website, for each of the 7 objectives, it sets out short, medium and longer term things within that. So maybe, yeah, a future learning for future reports is I need to make more correlation when perhaps capturing that information. So that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Jess?
Yeah, just picking up on that, I think we all sort of commented on that and just having that link between the actions that are in place and where we are against them. Because I was also wondering about that in terms of, obviously it's still really early days, but when you're taking on new partners or new organisations will come into it, and to be able to see where you are and what needs to be done. So my question on that was, are we utilising all of our partner resources to the maximum? And have you found any obstacles, perhaps, for some partners to get involved, or what work has been going on to help people do that?
First point is that there are, of course, 7 goals within the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, and it's critically important that partners don't select 1 or 2 goals and say that's our contribution. For example, you might think in terms of policing that the key one for us would be a Wales of cohesive communities. That's not the case. Well, certainly we are concerned with issues of antisocial behaviour and safer communities. Obviously we are. But we also would take all the other goals, the other 6 goals, very seriously indeed, and try and set out our contribution. We all have to have that type of awareness and approach. In terms of barriers, yes, I think it would be fair to say there are. And they would vary depending on the organisation. Gwent Police and my office being a pan-Gwent organisation, we will find that there will be differences within the 5 PSBs about emphasis and local situations. So it's very important that we can recognise those particular local requirements, whilst at the same time, for us, and I dare say others will be in the same situation, still having that pan-Gwent view of how we can collaborate. And one of the it is a practical difficulty for us that there are 5 separate PSBs as opposed to one Gwent PSB, but we have to overcome that. There's a G10, of course, but that doesn't have any statutory basis. It's voluntary in that sense, whereas the PSBs do have a statutory basis, so we have to balance that. But it can be a difficulty for pan-Gwent organisations being able to split down its resources, if you like.
Just really building on what Jeff said, I suppose that there are also some organisations that are pan-Wales, that Natural Resources Wales being one of them, and I guess it's a challenge for those organisations to both attend all of the PSBs across Wales, but also to measure their own organisation's internal objectives against what each individual PSB might be asking of them. So that is a challenge, but I guess it's a challenge that's been verbalised. It's one that we've talked about. It's one that we've recognised, and in talking with those different organisations about how we can help them overcome those challenges. Part of it can simply be about the logistics of having different people representing at different times. So you can't always have the chief officer attending, you can't always have the senior person there. So that's about how we communicate as a board, how we use the logistics in an effective way. What I would say is that more recently we've also been engaging with the private sector. So we've got the private sector involved as well. So they've been attending a couple of the workshops, and that's been really, really useful as well. It's a different perspective, and you know, the very nature of what we all do is layered in bureaucracy. That's the nature of the business, I guess, that we're all in. It's not for them, so they're very much wanting to cut to the chase and get on and start doing things, and that's been very refreshing for us.
Peter?
Thank you, Chair. I welcome this report and I think it's a good start. When I was reading it, I just had a couple of thoughts about the future rather than now, because this is a start, really. On page 7, we talk about giving children and young people the best start in life, and we talk about largely trying to improve academic qualifications. That's great, but I mean, there are already national targets around GCSEs, etc. I just wondered if in the future the PSB might wish to consider looking at NEETs, children not in education, employment, etc. Now, Torfaen are doing rather well in terms of Welsh Government statistics, in terms of NEETs. We're the best in the local authority at the moment on the latest statistics that were published in May this year. However, there's still something like 11 children out of every 1,000 in Gwent that are not in education employment. And this doesn't just cut across education. If you look at youth offending, for example, and the Police Commissioner, I'm sure, will agree with this, one of the best protective factors to keep children out of the criminal justice system is if they're in employment or in full-time education. So I really would push that the PSB could perhaps look at this in the future, and I'd welcome comments on that. And the other thing, on the same page, there's talk about looking at green spaces for Torfaen. Now, recently I chaired a task and finish group looking at the future of Green Meadow Farm. And I think there's an opportunity there for the PSB to look at the community hub aspect of that. There's already a lot of work going on at the community farm in terms of education, particularly for children that are NEETs. But there's also a lot of work going on with mental health and health. I think it's an opportunity for us because there's been threats to the Green Meadow Farm in terms of Torfaen's budget. I think there are opportunities for the PSB to potentially look at that as a potential thing to look at next time. And I'd welcome some comments on that as well, please.
Could I just make a quick observation as well, similar lines to Peter? I recently went to study day with the Canal and River Trust, and it struck me very forcefully, sat up that there are organisations there that should come to local PSBs which don't fit. Canal and River Trust was one of them, funnily enough. It would have to go to every PSB in South East Wales on the Mon and Breck connection. The other organisation I never thought of was Public Health Wales. They've got a statutory responsibility. They do they? But Molenbeek was one of them, who are our national organisation in England, and their offices for this area are in Gloucester, and they don't get PSBs. We gave them a bit of an education on that. Well, I only say that because that's one you might not have even thought of.
One other issue for our housing colleagues as well. On the next page, on page 8, there's a reference to the alleviation of loneliness and isolation. And we all know with the demography now that we've got an ageing population, we're all getting older. Housing social landlords have got a lot of older people complexes, and we've had, not from Melling but from Bronhaven, we've had discussions with them about how they could better utilise some of those facilities. And we've been trying, councillors have made some suggestions about social services ought to get involved, and that better use could be made of some of these complexes right across Torvine. I wondered if this is something with partnership working, because it's not just a housing issue, it's wider, it's particularly social, and it could also involve the police and fire and rescue, because older people need support, much more support than the general population. That's another area that potentially the PSB could look at in the future. I'd welcome comments on that as well.
That's not business as usual, isn't it, Peter? Yeah.
I'll start off with a couple of those. Excuse me. In relation to the NEETs and the bit about the best start in life, if you look at page 32, which is part of the appendix on the detail of work that's been happening, there's under the positive pathways, there's a bit of information there about historically the focus has been on the NEET group and about preventing people becoming NEET, and that's reduced, and they're continuing to look at that, but they're also widening that out to try and sort of look at people who don't become NEET in the first place. So that work is part of what they're doing through the PSB and under that. So it hasn't just been a council bit that we're doing; it's working in wider partnership. So there's a bit of it. There's a little paragraph there of information, and if you want more, then I can put you in touch with the officers that are leading that piece of work.
I recognise, the statistics show that we've done really well. There was 2.5% in 2013, it's down to 1.1% now. But I just think that really it's a focus that we shouldn't lose.
No, and I think that's what we're trying to say in this report, that it's not something to lose, and there are wider partners that we can bring in to help. The bit about the green spaces and mental health, I think the people that are leading on the green spaces part of it, which partly are council officers, Andrew Osborne and some of the others are doing some work to help Hugh Jakeway, the Chief Fire Officer, who's sponsoring that piece of work. And they are in touch with a number of organisations, and I would say that the Canal and River Trust, maybe not sitting on the board, but they are connected at those subgroups that are working on those things. The farm, I don't think, has been looked at, but we can pass that comment on and see where they go on that. Excuse me. And loneliness and isolation, I think there is quite a bit of work going on around that. Some of that will be through the Regional Partnership Board as well, under health and social care, and the parts of work that they are doing, and that's where the two boards need to be careful that we don't duplicate. We try and share information and complement what we're doing so that we're not doing duplication, but there are obviously places where things will cross over a little bit, and I believe housing is certainly around the table on the group that is looking at adults and older people under the Regional Partnership Board and the work that they're doing to address some of that. Plus, we're going to be picking up what comes through the Welsh Government's strategy now on loneliness and isolation, and making connections through that. So that's why I think reporting on some of these partnership things is so complex, because there's little bits here and there and everywhere, and we're trying to put forward what we're doing under the PSB, but also mindful that there's things that are going on under other partnerships as well, and trying to make those connections. So I hope that helps, and I think Paul and Mike want one.
No, sorry. Thank you for that. You anticipated I was going to ask you a question about avoiding duplication with the Regional Partnership Board, and you've answered that. And I'm reassured by that. That's what I wanted to say, I think, for now.
Jeff, you want to say something?
Thank you very much. Yes, the Councillor is absolutely right. We have to think of the future, hence the Future Generations Act. how we work with and for our young people is absolutely crucial, and you to be congratulated on the work on NEETs, because again, absolutely right. One of the best ways of stopping young people entering the criminal justice system is to make sure they have a worthwhile stake in adult life, and they have the right skills, all of which is as much to do with the police as any other public sector organisation. And going back to even younger ages, you will see in the report the references to ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences, where we're working jointly with Public Health Wales to actually improve the understanding of those issues that impact upon children's lives longer term if they're not addressed and identified at an early age. And I think those are examples of projects that are underway and probably would be underway even if the PSBs didn't exist. But nevertheless, it's absolutely important that we bring these projects together so that there is a coherence to it all. So I think the type of futuristic thinking that we're now embarking upon is captured quite well within the report.
Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to, in terms of, one of the objectives that we're working on is improving local skills through workforce planning, training, apprenticeships and volunteering opportunities, and I think that picks up nicely on the point that you were making, is that we can't rest on our laurels on some good outcomes. We have to think about the future. And on, I think it's page 42 and 43, there's some of the work there about the themes that are coming out around developing skills, coordinating services and maximising opportunities, and underneath each of those there's some actions that we're looking to take forward. But essentially what we're talking about is saying that we recognise that there is a changing need within the workforce now, and it isn't simply enough to think, oh well, it's just all about plumbing apprenticeships, or it's all just about going and doing hair and beauty. You know, that there is some more sophisticated thinking that we need to do if we're going to have a workforce ready for the future within Torfaen. So that group is very much focused around that, but recognising that there's a very broad range of people, and part of the work that we think we need to do is about raising aspirations as well of the young people of Torfaen. And I absolutely pick up on your point about community space within older persons complexes, and inviting the community in and making use of that space is something that's at the heart of most associations. Sometimes it's a little bit of a challenge because some of the people that live in those schemes don't necessarily want the community coming in and using their space. It can be challenging from that point of view, but we do really recognise the benefit of being able to use that space in that way.
The ones that I've been involved in, they were desperately trying to encourage more use from the community.
Yeah.
Just to pick up on the point about the issue of loneliness, well, I'm fairly fortunate in my ward that there's a couple of organisations that have been set up by residents there that play a vital role in providing support in this aspect. We've got the Longbridge Thursday Coffee Club, and we've got Age Connects as well, which have a Tuesday lunch. And just drawing in Steve here, because these organisations are reliant upon the community spaces, but to a large extent as well, in terms of funding, they rely on us councillors from our small schemes allowance, and also any grants that they get from the community councils, and they do play a significant role, and often unrecognised role, in combating loneliness and isolation.
Thank you. Jess?
Yeah, I just want to pick up on a point earlier. It was quite encouraging to say that private business is starting to get involved with the PSB, because obviously there's some aspects that, you know, as much as we like, we can't really change. So the one that sprung to mind, for example, was public transport, you know, which feeds into everything from poverty through to greener and cleaner, you know. So, I mean, my question was, you know, how do we foresee our partnerships, or your partnerships with the private sector even, changing as the PSB grows? And also, how do you work with other PSB boards, for example? Like, so say with buses, you know, you look at Newport, where it's more involved with the city, you know, can you look at examples elsewhere of partnerships that exist?
picking up on what Jess was saying there, in terms of electric vehicle charging point infrastructure project, clearly the private sector have got huge involvement in this sort of area in the future. I just wondered how, this is picking up on what you're saying, particularly with that, how are we going to engage with the private sector going forward?
Yeah. Chair wants an involvement just very quickly. I noticed develop a functional collective network of natural areas. Under that, you've even got identify strategic opportunities to develop active travel networks and promote outdoor activity. The whole business about travel, it came up on Monday when we had the health board in. How do you get to Evervale Hospital? How do you get to the places like Blaenavon, which are isolated late and early? The whole issue about how you get round this borough if you don't own a car, and bearing in mind, if you look at the objectives on global climate change, how you get round with electric vehicles or other ways, because the issue you've got there about charging points using non-carbon car, this whole thing you guys have got to sort out one way or another. Well, we all have. And this becomes a very big issue. And I noticed the issue on climate change is the whole papers on that here are thinner than they are on this one. So it is something we've all got to work on together, collectively, but you are leading on it. So this starts to get very real, doesn't it? I don't know what your comments are on that one.
Pick up just one or two points on that here. The member mentioned, the PSB's talk and get together. Well, we're a little bit more formal than that. We've got a Gwent strategic lead officer group, which both myself and Sue and all the statutory members and the invited participants of the PSB, we talk at the regional level. So we do a lot of activity together. We've been very successful because that group is very collective. It's been recognised by Welsh Government as being a good vehicle, and hence why we've drawn down quite significant funding, which is also in your report. So just to put your mind at rest, we do talk at the regional level. When really, because we're all in this together. I've used that term a few times today, but in essence, we're trying to reduce duplication. We're trying to reduce effort on our Gwent partners as well as part of that process. And we're also working on developing how we can be stronger together as Gwent. Now, transport and the opportunities for electrical vehicle points has come from that regional group. So that's not just looking at electric vehicle points in Torfaen, it's looking at electric vehicle points across Gwent. So we're trying to bring that collective response together. It's small steps. When we're talking about significant transport change, sometimes that needs a policy decision as well. That helps with that. But in terms of what we're doing at the regional level, we're trying to encourage electric vehicles point. We had a conversation with the public that said, yes, we would use it if we had the points. Not all of us have got garages and drives, so we need somewhere to log in, and that's part of the bid that's now gone off to OLEV, which is the low emissions agency. So a bid has gone off on behalf of Gwent, not individually, because we think a Gwent bid is stronger than individually, just on trying to develop that. Now that impacts on both transport availability and it impacts on our climate change and our other mitigations that we're trying to look at regionally. If we can tackle those issues regionally, they have a natural knock-on benefit effect locally. So all the stuff that we're doing regionally links in locally, reduces duplication, and we hope is taking it forward. Now, the lady you saw on the video is Fen Turner, very enthusiastic officer, very capable officer, and she's doing a tremendous piece of work on taking that work forward. And locally with us, Rachel O'Shaughnessy is leading that. As you know, Rachel O'Shaughnessy is very well developed around the sustainability agenda, so Rachel's involved with that as well. So just to give you some assurances that there is activity going on in that
I
area.
got two questions on here, which was kind of answered partly. It's about how strategic and operational things for your partnership work. And I think that anybody want to reflect on that, because obviously what I'm hearing is how you're working as a partnership, but anybody want to reflect on that at all? at all? I had those, they're sat there, and you were answering it to some degree.
I mean, in terms of the way, you know, I think the board is maturing as we progress. You know, it's a big ask asking a lot of organisations to get together and you know, really start to push things forward. So we are getting the strategic direction from the executive board, and that's what it was set up to do. The executive board set the objectives once we've done the wellbeing assessment. We've now got an operational group that's taking forward those as lead. So we have a number of executive sponsors. Paul is an executive sponsor, Bill is an executive sponsor on the board, and Simon is an operational lead. So we've got the structures in place that make sure that there's the linkages, and the operational people go back to speak to the strategic leads to make sure we continue with that ongoing dialogue of engagement. We can't expect the senior executives around the PSB table to get involved in the operational business of taking forward the objectives. That's really for operational staff on the ground to be taken forward. But we do take our, well, I'm saying we have just administer the board, but the officer support group take the direction from the executive.
We're making progress. I guess the proof will be in the pudding of the sort of financial decisions as well to resource things as we go forwards. Do people work and then sort of come back, and also the challenges there to Welsh Government. If they want us to think, you know, collaboratively and think long term, that will only happen when the way which we're judged as organisations changes. Because it's all very well to sort of say you're committed to the Future Generations Act as a Welsh Government, but then if you're judged on the short term and you're judged about the, you know, the performance targets you met, you know, in a very sort of objective way, then organisations are going to conform to the old way of working. Whereas if we're judged in the long term and we're judged in the round about how we work collaboratively, then people will do that. You know, the danger always being that you've got people, you know, at an operational level who say, yeah, well, it's all very good talking about, you know, the long term and about operational, you know, about collaboration, but I'm going to be judged on the performance targets that I hit in the next quarter. So, you know, that's the pushback maybe, is that I think we're getting there culturally. But the shift across Wales will happen if organisations are judged on that basis rather than on how it's always been.
Sorry to take a slightly differing view, Anthony, but I feel that there's merit and argument on both. We need to not just be focusing on the long-term aims and objectives. My opinion is that there are things that we can't afford to wait 25, 30 years on to take action on. Climate change is the obvious one. With that in mind, there's a number of things that can be brought in sooner. I know that, and this sort of leads me nicely into my next question, we could set about short-term deliverables. I know that one thing that we're going to be asked as members going forwards is about land management usage as part of the local development plan. Now, I wanted to pick up on a point that was made on page 51 of the report, where it says most PSB partners own land, include green spaces, and are all committed to working together on the management of these natural areas. We spent months researching how we could best tackle this objective, concluding we did not currently have the expertise or capacity to fully address the issues that we are facing. And to me, that was a concern. It then goes on to say that some funding has been found, and I wanted to ask the partners here today to what extent you've had consultation with council officers over you know, land usage, future land usage going forwards. There are things we can do in the short term in Torfaen. One of the things that we identified is that there's been a decline in the tree policy in this borough, for example, over the last few years. Although we seem to be one of the greener ones in Wales, it's actually declined by 2.5%. So we've been keen to promote the eco-impact and usage of Section 106 monies. I mean, a recent example of that was at planning, where we brought up the developer had put an offer in for community transport, and in the end we got a motion passed that that money would be used for further ecological enhancements. So the question, I think, to just disagree with Anthony in that it shouldn't all be long-term based. There are things we should start working on immediately, and there are things we can do. One of those we're going to be asked in the relatively short to near term is this land management policy and land usage. So it's the consultation on that and what is happening as a result of this expertise gap, please.
Anthony?
I don't think we do disagree. I'm talking about long-term issues sometimes require short-term action, and climate change is a classic example. It is a long-term issue, but it also requires immediate action. So I don't disagree with that.
Yeah, it was, I suppose just to reflect that very conversation is a conversation that's happened at the PSB, where we're talking about the fact that you know, the expectation of the Act is that we think longer term, but there is an absolute recognition that we need to think about things locally in short and medium term measures as well. But we also, we have reflected on the fact that sometimes we shouldn't just badge things that we would do normally as an organisation. So if my organisation would go out and do something anyway, regardless of the impact of the PSB, then we shouldn't just be badging that as a PSB activity. We need to be, the idea of the PSB coming together is it tackles those really difficult, thorny problems that we would struggle to do in isolation. So those are the things that we need to be thinking about. So there is absolutely a balance to be struck, but you know, I mean, if I was a citizen sitting there judging this, I'd be looking and saying, yeah, but what about me? What about now? It's all very well thinking about my children, thinking about my grandchildren. I want the electric charging points now, not in 30 years' time. So absolutely, I think there is a recognition of that.
Yeah. Well,
Thank you. We'll just point out on page 25 of the report, of the annual report, because I think you were referring to the plan itself just now, weren't you, when you said page 51?
is it the 51?
Of the plan itself? Oh, right. Yeah.
51, yeah.
But on page 25, there's or under the appendix 2 then of the wellbeing objectives, the bits about the functional connected network, preparing a comprehensive green infrastructure strategy. That's the bit about we've acknowledged that, you know, all the public services own green spaces, and that we haven't got the expertise, but we've been able to draw down some external funding to start looking at some of those very things that you've pointed out, really, and like Mr. Cuthbert just said, you know, looking at estates and how we're using that land and how we can come together. So that it's, I suppose it's one of those things, the very early start of those things about, you know, recognising where we've got expertise and where we haven't, and where we need to, and are there any funding or other opportunities we can draw in private businesses or other things to help us to get, you know, to look at the things that we can't do ourselves. So just to reassure you that we may not have done something, but we are starting to. We certainly recognise it as a piece of work that we need to progress on.
Just a very quick thing. I'm not sure if members have been aware, but it was announced on the lunchtime news today that the UK government was announcing plans to be completely carbon neutral by 2050. Yeah. And of course that's a fairly topical thing because it impacts on everyone around this table, really. One of the measures that they were proposing is to have these little robots that go underneath the floorboards in houses to spray in additional insulation, for example. So the considerations there would obviously be for new builds, what standards would have to be met for environmental controls, whether these additional measures to go back to increase insulation on existing properties could be met. Logistically, and then you've got the implications then of whether the materials are sufficiently fire retardant. We've had issues obviously Grenfell where the cladding wasn't sufficient. It impacts again on land usage and natural resources Wales, where we're talking about access to open spaces and planning of communities, and the planning of the communities has a bearing on the crime levels associated with those particular estates, and also community cohesion. So that one thing just very nicely picks up every partner around the table.
Question, please. I said when I started I thought it was a very informative documentation, but obviously it's a new setup. Challenges, were they easy to overcome, in getting more people involved with the PSB? And how easy were these challenges to overcome? And are you still having any people not willing to participate?
It's a very good question, and it actually was asked before. We had one answer which I agreed largely with. I kind of, one of the barriers that was described as before, it's the same challenges, and they are, and just to support Anthony, some of the challenges are around government steer. They can make it easier for public servants if the government steer is different. So that is something that we could definitely improve. And I think the way the PSB has to address that is by showing government the opportunity, the potential, turning those risks into opportunities by showing this is possible. And if we can do this without it, if we can do this by accident or in spite of the government steer, how much more can we do? The other thing is scale. We've talked about that, which is different operating scales, and we are on all 19 PSBs in Wales. We have something to offer because we can bring the practice across there. We don't lose sight of the localness, and that's the other important thing, and that's why I think we get people asking about tangible stuff. We get that, and Anthony said it on the introduction there. We do care about Torfaen. Sorry, I will answer your question. Sorry, I went off on a bit of a soapbox there. But the third thing is about cultural stuff, and I think that's right. And it is. I'm not going to sit here and say that is easy. It isn't. We've taken a long time to get into this way of working, and all I can say is, sitting on the PSB, there is a genuine commitment from all partners on the board to actually work in different ways and to look at some of those blockers that we see, and we see very good reasons why they're there, because people are being told to hit targets, or that they work in the old ways they've done. So we're trying to address that. We're looking at what we share as values as a board, and therefore how we can bring those into our constituent organisations in order that we can look at solving some of the bigger problems, not getting in the way of this good stuff that's going on, because there's an awful lot of good stuff going on already. But it's not getting in the way of that, but it's creating the environment, if you like, so that we can do more. But that is a barrier. But we're learning about each other, and we're being put through our paces, aren't we, by our critical friend, our MSc Academy Wales secondee, who's very challenging, and we really are learning from her.
Yeah, I was going to say earlier on, and then the conversation moved on. We've had the deputy head of the Her Majesty's Prisons and Probation for this area contact me to say she sent her apologies today because she doesn't feel at the moment that whilst she sees the PSB and scrutiny sessions as important, the organisation hasn't been that involved to date. But actually, she's finding the annual report is giving us some ideas now about how that organisation can get involved and start making the connections with the different work streams. So although they sit at the board, and I think that might be the case for some of the other partners around the table, that they've sat on the board, yes, and have been part of the board, but actually sort of perhaps having the opportunity to get involved or take the lead, they've been finding their way differently, and obviously like the police and they come under the Home Office rather than Welsh Girls, they're not evolved, so finding the ways that they can get involved has been different. But certainly the conversation we had this morning when she sent her apologies was around they're starting to see the way now where they can make those connections. So just to reassure you, we try to make connections at all levels, and certainly, PSSU, I suppose we're the sort of glue sometimes. They must be fed up of all the emails I send out on occasions of trying to see them all.
It's really glad to know that they are eager to sort of participate, and it also be, as a feather account that we're moving forward with every walk of life, isn't it?
Finished. Never mind. Oh, right.
Right, sorry about this. Jess, did you have any more questions in your list there?
Yeah, I suppose so.
Your list there.
Yeah, I mean, mostly they've been answered really as we've gone along. I suppose my one question would be around measuring and outcomes. Obviously, it's really still early days, but some of the goals are going to be much more difficult to measure than others. So, for example, the one I picked up here was tackling intergenerational patterns of poverty, which obviously, the ways you're going to measure that. So I suppose the question is just when do you envisage measurements starting to be put into these plans, and how will you seek to overcome these ones that are quite difficult?
Yeah, it's really, really hard. And that's a really good example of, if you're tackling intergenerational poverty, at what point do you start to measure? At what point do you start to judge that we've had an impact as opposed to society's had an impact? So, current Westminster policy is having a very catastrophic impact locally, and a change of government might change that, and that in itself might bring about a change to how we respond. If it continues in the way it was, then it is at the moment, then that's going to require something different of us. So I think, you know, what we recognise is that we just need to identify the things that we can do, that we have an understanding that we suspect will have an impact, and just try to monitor that on an ongoing basis. I think it's you know, we're not so naive as to think that it's all going to be about us, because I don't think it can be. And in some ways, you know, it might be, however hard we work locally, there is only so much that we can do within the context of some Westminster-based decisions about how people are able to live their lives.
Yes. Just to add to that, I think it's a really good question. And we tried, I hope we tried to put down maybe not measures of outcomes or how things have changed, but our activity, what we're trying, the stuff we're trying to do, the benefits should come later. So there are, if you look in the summaries, there are evidence of where we've been working. I'm familiar with what we're doing in Blaenavon, where we're looking at trying to work more closely with the regional partnership board, so that we've got the shared services that happen in there, that hub that we're creating, to try and create an area where people can have a one-stop shop, if you like. They can go in and they can pick up on other issues, and we can start to get those officers who are involved in a variety of different needs for the community actually meeting up with each other and talking. So we're trying to get a more natural system rather than forcing it. So little wins.
I wanted to make a comment on that, because the last scrutiny we did, the one thing we reflected on, I think you've tried to address it to some extent, was communication. You've done the film, but how you communicate your successes and maybe even your frustrations. I think you were reflecting on the poverty measures as one of them, and obviously global warming exercises is another one, because the length of work you've done on some aspects and not others is obviously a frustration, I suspect. How you get over what you're doing simply, plain language, is obviously going to be a problem. So, I mean, how do you go forward with that with limited resources is always a big question. I mean, reflection on that, please.
I guess one of the things is you know, the film is a mechanism which we think is a very accessible way to, you know, because with the best will in the world, you guys have all got your reports, and I suspect and have, you know, multiple papers to read through, and you're used to doing that. The average citizen in the street is just not going to do that. They're unlikely to do that. So the efforts of doing a film and putting it on YouTube is a way of maybe encouraging people to access the work of the PSB in a way that they perhaps wouldn't otherwise. We won't know how successful or otherwise that is until that's out there, and how many likes and how many views it gets, and if it's successful, then it's something that we can continue, and if it isn't, then I guess that we need to think about other ways in which we can communicate. I think the other thing is that we all as PSB members have a responsibility to make sure that we're sharing it with the people that we work with, and not, you know, for those of us that work more locally within the local area, but for those organisations that work across Pan Gwent or across Pan Wales, to be sharing that, and to be bringing back maybe good practice that's going on elsewhere, because we're all finding our feet in this, and you know, some are more successful at it than others. I mean, I sit on more than one PSB, and the approach that this PSB takes is different to another PSB that I sit on. I won't comment on whose I think is more successful or otherwise, but it is, you know, it is, you know, there is a learning, there is a shared learning across Wales, I think, that can be taken in as well.
One of the favourite questions that scrutineers love to ask is what's happening elsewhere. Success. It's always, success does breed success. So if there are good examples, they always go to these guys and use that, but obviously not criticism. You understand? You know, if it's good practice, share it.
That is one of the roles that the Group of 10 seeks to do on a Pan Gwent basis, is to receive reports, even though it doesn't have a statutory basis, but to see where you can cascade good work, and also understand where things have not worked, so it's not repeated. even though there might be different local circumstances. So I think there is a vehicle for achieving that. It's only been relatively recently resurrected, that group, but I think it can have an important role in that regard within a Gwent basis. But certainly, I think the Future Generations Commissioner is very keen to be able to cascade good practice across Wales, from other parts of Wales, where it's relevant to Torfaen in this case. So I'm fairly sure, I think I'm right in saying that she will be producing reports that will embrace those good practice. Yeah.
Thank you. Any more observations on that one?
I'll just one observation on that. The Future Generations Commission has just produced something from across Wales on some of the easy wins or some of the quick changes that public services boards and their constituents can make, drawn on best practice gathered across Wales. So that's a document that's quite useful for us to look at as a way of seeing if they've done it there. So that's an example of sharing knowledge.
Did you want to say something?
Yeah, just picking up on those points, actually, I think we've got a lot to learn in terms of the council. I sit on another committee as well, which is the Rural Local Action Group Committee. And far from being a load of activists out with placards and banners, it's actually a committee that represents the 9 rural wards that we've got within the borough. And the point you made about wading through loads of reports and press releases, I think we can learn as our corporate communications team within the council here could learn from the picking up, the points that were made in a short film that was done by Natural Resources Wales, because that was very informative and conveyed all the information. And we're not always good at conveying our successes. The reason I referred to this other committee was because it's only because of my participation on that committee and now this new appointment to PSB that I even became aware of what was going on in the Uplands project, for example, and the majority of elected members here, unless they had exposure to one or other committees, are probably not aware of the work that's been done and the successes in gaining that funding for the work to be undertaken in collaboration with neighbouring authorities as well.
Just to say, it's the team at Torfaen that have put that video together. They've done an excellent job, and I'm really pleased that they didn't show you the clip of me on there, because it's awful to be sitting here and watching yourself on TV. Fen did a brilliant job. So, but there is a short video being put together for each of the objectives. But it's the team at Torfaen that have actually pulled that together. It was Jeff and Paul who came out and put me through the trauma of sitting in front of a camera. So we're not to be too self-congratulatory, but I think it's the team here that have done a really, really good job of thinking about it differently and thinking about how to make it accessible, how to make a very complex subject approachable for people. So yeah.
Don't worry, I'm on Facebook being eaten by a dinosaur, so you think you've got worries. Okay, any more questions, scrutineers?
Yeah.
Yes, Pete?
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned earlier on about government steers. Now, I want to pick up on a government steer, not in the context that you raised, but it just raised an issue in my mind. On page 57, we talk about this is the section on providing children and young people the best possible start in life. And there's a little section on speech and language skills. I think that ought to also include sensory loss services. I think it's really important. And where this government steer comes in the Social Services and Wellbeing Act, Code of Practice Part 2, paragraphs 181 to 185, if you want to know the detail, there's a clear steer there that local authorities and health boards, and we haven't got a health board rep here today, have we? No. But there's a clear steer that they should work in partnership to deliver services, habilitation services for children that are suffering from sensory loss. So has this been picked up by the PSB? And if not, why not? Because there's a clear government steer from the Welsh Government that something should be done. And I raise this issue in the context of there's a very good service in Gwent, not Torfaen, Gwent, the SEMCON service. Yeah. And we did have a hiccup, Anthony, earlier in the year, a bit of a crisis, which we averted. Yeah. But I think if the PSB looked at that, potentially, maybe we wouldn't have a crisis in the future.
Just to reassure you, I have, when the officers put that report in, I have raised it with them about sensory impairment, and I also picked up the Welsh language side of things as well. So it's now on their radar.
Thank you.
Could I make the point that how many partnership arrangements have we got across the piece, which is something that we've brought up at scrutiny before, and it seems an obvious place that PSB has a relationship with that, I would suspect. Is it 70 odd? The Pan-Gwent partnerships that we've got. It's quite a lot, isn't it?
We're in terms of the PSB linkages, we've got those fairly well nailed across Gwent Council actually. But sorry, we've also tried to make sure that we can't have such a partnership that's so big that we can't. It becomes unable to develop. So, but we've got, as I said, we've got an executive direction given to us. We've got then officers leading on certain areas, and they're like octopuses. They've got tentacles everywhere. So they are linking in very well, and that's all the partners that you see across. But Jason White from the police, he's really going across all the partners as well. Just Adrian from Mellon and really making those connections strongly, and Simon in the fire service.
Only reason to make that because sometimes when we scrutinise those partnerships, and I take Pete's point about that service, is that some of those partnerships, where they sit is like the PSB, and maybe sometimes they should sit somewhere.
It's interesting because there are wider governance conversations going on across Gwent around, where does the area planning board sit, where does the Valdre SD agenda sit, in terms of governance. So there are wider discussions around that. I suppose for the work we do across the PSB, we're grabbing hold of what we can tangibly get on with, but ensuring that where those linkages are made. And I reiterate the point, we've got excellent relationships with Phil Diamond from the Regional Partnership Board, because we've been adamant from the very beginning. If the Regional Partnership Board are doing it, we are not.
Okay.
So that makes those connections as well.
Was there something down?
Yeah, just before we went off this subject, it would be remiss of me not to say, of course we should recognise that this isn't about just new collaborative arrangements. It's about safeguarding and strengthening existing ones. And I think you're quite right, Peter, that SENCOM's an excellent example of a collaborative service that works in the best interests of service users across, from health to education, working with families as well, and that's certainly something that I value and that we should work to protect the PSB. It's not just about new things, it's about looking at what's worked and strengthening those arrangements.
One last comment, and we were talking about comms earlier. I really like these, the one-page little things. And I really hope that we see them. I mean, obviously this is, I think it's just Word or whatever, but works up into a bit of a graphic, and they're very easy to share. So I think those will be really useful as well.
Are we drawing to a natural conclusion here, by the sound of it? Yeah. So would you like to all say something? Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to raise. We've been having the conversation today. Yeah. And Bill mentioned we've got a graduate working with us around some of the behaviour change. But part of that work, the chair of the board sent an email out today because we think we've got a real opportunity to start to push apprenticeships for local that complements the existing apprenticeship schemes of partners across the PSB have got, but something that we can work on locally as a PSB. So that's something tangible that's coming out of that piece of work that we're making a bid to our government on. So that's something positive to just let you know, and some good action that's going forward.
Well, you have the last word, if you like, Anthony.
I'll just comment on that, and that's something that very much builds on the sort of the foundational economy work and a lot of the partnership work that's going on. Everything from local manufacturing firms to public services who are struggling with the gap between skills available and training available and the workforce they're going to need in the future. So that's just one example of how we can come together to try and get solutions, as well as doing the long, the building the foundations work, trying to get those issues addressed. Climate change is another one that we need to get action on to address straight away, whilst acknowledging the long-term nature of the issue.
All I can say is thank you very much. It's been a very interesting, full and frank discussion, and thank you very much indeed, everybody. And I hope we come up with some recommendations or observations, I'm not sure what we call them, that will suit you on your... Thank you. Okay, would you like to reiterate what you've got back there? Would members like anything they want to make observation? I'll do it that way round. Points.
Yeah, just like we talked about, better linkage in the reports to their goals, so it's more clear when you're looking at it. If you want to word that much nicer than that.
Yeah, no, I have that one noted down. Sue mentioned, because you were querying about the short, medium and longer term actions and goals, and she did mention that it was in the plan, but that going forward there could be better linkages in the annual report to make that clear.
And also updates on how they better collaborating with partnerships. Also, now the probation service would get on board, I think, that would be an asset as well.
I asked about making better use of these older people complexes in terms of community hubs and the linkages, not just with the social landlords, but with social services. I think there's and we know what was happening earlier in the year, but we won't go into that here, but I think that's important. I raised the issue around Green Meadow Community Farm as a community hub, and I really think there's opportunities there for the PSB to look at that in terms of education, health, etc. This isn't just about a visitor's attraction, and I'd like that to be put forward. In terms of the early years thing, I raised this issue about it's wider than speech and language, sensory loss, and actually I did make the point that there's a big government steer in the Code of Practice of the Social Service and Wellbeing Wales Act. We were given assurances that they're looking at it, but I think we want to reaffirm that we want that to be looked at because it's wider than speech and language. I know we've got a good service in Gwent with SEMCOM, but we nearly lost it with Newport threatening to pull out, and they're going to review that. So I think it's something the PSB ought to keep an eye
on. How is engagement working with the over 50s forums? Because I didn't get that mentioned at all.
You did very well there, Jan. You stayed longer than you said you would.
They ask sensible questions.
I haven't got any others, Chair, that members haven't already raised. Other than an overall comment, you raised, Councillor Jones, about the NEETs, etc. And they said how they've made improvements, but you were keen that they keep striving on to make improvements, even when things are successful, that they keep those.
Well, the point I made about the NEETs is that in terms of, I used to lead for the Welsh Government on youth crime for many years. When children, they call it in youth justice terms, it's a protective factor, and employment or full-time education keeps children out of the criminal justice system. So there's real scope for partnership working around needs. Our stats at the moment are very good in Torvine, but we mustn't rest on our laurels. So.
I was going to make a point about how they include organisations. I did bring up the point of Canal and River Trust, and organisations like that are not included because it's Brooksy's got, when he, in representing TVA, he represents somebody represents TVA. You've got national organisations like them that really don't get a look in, and they're quite important. It's how you get the representation into PSB of organisations like that are quite fundamental for some of our assets.
That's right. And the other issue, Jess started this one off, was on the involvement of the private sector, and then I picked up on the in terms of the electric vehicle infrastructure. It is a public sector board, but with a lot of these objectives, there has to be wider engagement with the private sector. So, I mean, I picked up on one in particular because, I mean, it'll be garages that'll be delivering charging points, and that's private sector.
And then the other issue that came up with the health board on Monday was this whole business of where the environment and transport and that stuff. There's a whole issue in there. It's an environmental issue. If you look in that number one about environment and transport and stuff like that, how they get, how I frame it is a difficult one. It's a big issue around transport. They've got that as an issue there. They flagged it up. Yeah,
Lyndon did mention that's more of a regional.
Okay, no, I won't go with that. But the other issue that I've noticed is how much they get. Certain issues are got more priority than others, and it's what going forward. They're going to have how they prioritise more work into certain of those than others. I think that's a problem for them. I don't know how they do that.
So how
you're the expert.
Recommendation.
Seven of these areas of work, some of them got massive, great loads of work done on them, and others haven't. How will you get an equal amount of work done on this issue? I mean, Global Woman is a good example. Emergency is a good example. There's very little work being done.
I'm sure if you'd asked that as a question, they would explain in terms of there's more that can be done in shorter timescales on certain issues, or when things are more timely and how.
We had that discussion.
If you look at the back pages where they got the funding streams, there's a number of them where they haven't done anything yet. And I think it's the state of play. This is, short, medium and long term, but a lot of long term stuff. And this is the very early stages of this.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Chair. I had a number of points, please, if I may, Chair. I wasn't very satisfied with the responses I had back in terms of the preparation of the green infrastructure strategy, where they admitted themselves they didn't have the expertise, they'd raised this sum of money, they're producing a report. So one of the recommendations is that they report further back to the PSB committee once they've completed their report and their initial findings. The second thing was I feel there could be done more on the promotion of community hubs to combat this issue of isolation and loneliness. I mentioned the two that we had in Pontia and said how reliant they were on the Council of Small Schemes Allowance and Community Council funding, but I do feel that that's an area that could be further developed across the borough, is further promotion of these, because obviously as people are living longer, that led me on to point number 4. There's a lot in there about what they're doing with youngsters, and you mentioned the NEETs issue and what have you. But the other end of the spectrum, in terms of mental health issues and Alzheimer's, it's a shame we didn't have anybody from the health board here today, but I didn't feel there was enough in the report for focusing on the older spectrum with specific regard to mental health awareness issues. And my final point I had, other than just the one response I had from Jeff, I was very disappointed with the lack of further responses about what extent there'd been consultation with the partners over this land management. Because Jeff was the only one who gave me an answer, and he was speaking specifically about the relocation of the police headquarters, but the others didn't really pick up on that. So I would have liked to have seen a lot more feedback and information from the partners in response to that particular question.
Sorry, Councillor Bevan, are you happy then for me to put those comments as observations and comments? Because there's not really a recommendation or a commuting into a
microphone. The first one was a recommendation that we receive a further report back once they've done this further work on the green infrastructure strategy. So that would be a recommendation, and then the others you can put as observations.
I know where if you take Hughes green infrastructure and hubs and that, a lot of people are suggesting that we go down the line of what's known as place planning, which is what community councillors have been asked to do. If the PSB was to go down some form of community or place planning exercise, it's an obvious one, because they don't need to be experts. All they need to do is collect data and put it in down the lines of the Wellbeing of Future Generations plan. Collect data, they can pull experts into the whole business about green spaces, and that is all done in that. You collect the data and the information based on communities. It's as simple as that. So, I mean, my recommendation would be for them to have a look at some form of community stroke place planning. Simple as that. They can either accept or not do that. Take every ward in the borough, look at what's there in terms of Future Generations Act. That is environment, there's a list that goes with the Future Generations Act, and just ask them to do that. I can give you the list if you want.
Sorry, what was that? Community place planning?
Community place planning. If that then fits your hubs and everything in.
I think, Chair, this bit where they've got just a very small amount of funding, this 50k, this comprehensive green infrastructure strategy, is one of the key pieces of delivering on Future Generations Act and sustainability.
Yeah.
We need a holistic approach,
I agree with you.
right? Or from all the joined up partners, because this doesn't just impact on Natural Resources Wales. This has an impact on us internally in Torfaen in terms of the planning department, even down to what kind of plans are approved and what kind of ecological resilience and biodiversity resilience is going to be built into this. The green space issue again ties in with planning, but they've only allocated 50k. Unfortunately, if you look at the funding in the annexes, it pales into insignificance in terms of some of the funding for other areas. What we need is this holistic approach across all partners, and it's. I don't feel that there's enough on this at the moment. They said we don't have the expertise or capacity. We're trying to buy some expertise in.
Henrietta has started every ward in the borough's got.
I think we've got that recommendation down now. I mean, there's no point in going into too much specifics because you know.
So
go back to the loneliness and isolation. Obviously, I raised the issue of the older people's complex, and Hugh has raised the wider issue of the hubs. Great stuff. But what Sue said in response was quite right. She talked about the Welsh Government has recently done a consultation on loneliness and isolation, and I went to some of those events. They've now published the consultation responses, but the next step will be they'll publish some sort of policy, and they're not going to do anything new. They're going to look at joining up what they're doing. But I think we could legitimately ask the PSB, once that Welsh Government direction of travel is published, what they could come back to us and tell us what they're going to do collectively to tackle loneliness and isolation in Torfaen.
You've got other things happening like men's sheds.
Yeah, no, well, that's fine. But if that will give us another opportunity to probe that. Yeah, and you know, but that's leaving in the stuff we've said about community hubs and older people's complexes and how they should be working now. But I do think that's is something that the PSB will have to look at, because once the Welsh Government publishes what they want to do to tackle loneliness and isolation in Wales, you know, that guy was talking here about government steer. There'll be a steer. So I think we could legitimately ask them to, what, you know, in the light of what the government proposed, the PSB will be doing.
But if you've got place plans, you put all of that in it. Every single bit legitimately goes in it.
Are we asking for a separate report, or for them just to highlight it when they come back again with their next annual report?
You wouldn't put your environment on everything else?
No.
That'd be separate, would it?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. No, that would be what I think, yeah. And I mean, and this is picking up on Hugh's point about, you know, we talked a lot about children in early years, but there is a big agenda, and I think I raised it in one context, about the demographic change. So loneliness and isolation is going to be a growing issue. It's just purely on population change. Yeah.
So the other aspects, like environment, like civil, and all the rest of it, put under each of their own headings. Yeah, no, because they're different. No, I agree with you. Yeah, no.
And obviously that's entirely up to you. If you're, as a scrutiny committee, happy to take those forward, that would mean extra meetings to look at those.
Start giving something to do, wouldn't it? Yeah.
For an extra meeting, we could have a slot on that in the next time of meeting, yeah. And the timing of that will depend on when the Welsh Government publish, and they've got to have time to consider it. So that may be 10 months in advance. You know, we don't just in a specific meeting on that, but I think we could have a one page or something on what they're going to do.
Everybody finished? Happy? Yeah. Smile. Thank you very much. You switched the camera off with me.